We are recording.
Perfect. And as always, thanks for reminding me to stay on track with everything. She sent me a nice message yesterday, and she's like, "Hey, are we gonna get this stuff put together for content?" And I'm like, "Totally, we are." so, um, this is we're going to talk about proactive pricing today, and we're going to talk a little bit about Moxie Present, and you might have heard me say this, and I'll double down on it because it's a very true statement. Moxie Present is one of my favorite technology tools that we use. And honestly, I think it's one of the most powerful. When I was with Coldwell Banker years ago, we rolled out Moxie, and I was like, man, this has a lot of incredible power to really elevate the listing presentation. And so we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to weave some ideas in, and I'll mention it again at the end. But I had recorded a walkthrough technical video on what I call the how, where to click to do all these things. We're not going to talk so much about that today. We try to keep this more strategy concept. We usually have another piece that's, here's all the steps. And then, of course, in your office meeting, you'll have a chance to do some of this stuff. So I want to really think of this as sort of a high level of what I call proactive pricing. And there's some content from the brand on proactive pricing. It's a fantastic class. Really, the idea is here today, and I'll cement this concept to start. Real estate agents have a couple of jobs. One of the most important to me is what I'll say mastery of the market, or the pricing piece of that, knowing where homes find value, kind of understanding that entire concept. And I think that's one of the three skills we must continue to hone all of the time. So we'll talk about some different ideas as we go through this. Move over to this screen. Oops. So again, in the big piece of things, this really just fits into the listing presentation being systemized, repeatable, and adaptable for each client. As the reminder, we did the overview of the green print, and we introduced that piece last week, so please make sure to watch that video. I will double down on the statement. I'm absolutely convinced if you do a mediocre, decent method of following those steps, you'll land your listings and you'll generate referrals from those listings. So what I want to talk about today is just the one little slice of how we put together pricing. In our next session, we're going to talk about what I call the show flow, when I actually show up at the door to do the listing presentation, and how to run that through a nuance. So all of this stuff will start to finally come together, and you're like, now this movie makes sense that Jake had to put together in three parts, like it's Lord of the Rings or something like that. So let's start with this. I am a fan of words. Words matter. What we say matters. How we say things matter. Mixing up the words we use for different audiences is incredibly important as well. And this is something that I wholly believe in, at least this idea specifically. When we say price, we do a disservice to our clients by immediately telling them something subconsciously, right? When we go to a store and something is priced a certain amount, well, that's what some corporate entity has decided to put a sticker on this, and individual companies can raise and lower the price based on how much profit they want. It's entirely the wrong conversation for what we do. The housing market, and you'll hear me use that word a ton, is a commodity market. Its value is based on what people want to pay. We think that our clients understand that. I'm just not wholly convinced they really do understand that. So a couple of things. I don't love the word price. You'll hear me say price a dozen times today just for us, right? Because it's an easy word to use. Take a look at this list and maybe cringe at a couple of them, like, Jake, I would never, ever say that. And I'm cool with that idea. But I want you to think about when you do say price, maybe we find a better option for price that I say that all the time, that resonates with you. I absolutely love initial market position for this reason. The phrase itself has three components that already builds in a bigger idea and a bigger picture. Initial may not be final. It could go up or down, right? We think that, initial and we have a price improvement, right? But our initial price could end up being lower than what our final offer, deal, contract price might be based on any number of things. So when you say initial market position to the client, you're automatically saying initial, this is our starting point. Market, based on what the market tells us, right? Because it's going to be a huge factor that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And position, which I think is the magic word. How it relates to everything else currently on the market as well. We build in an immediate piece of power and perspective for our clients. And I love when we say things to clients and they're like, initial market position, that sounds fancy. And you're like, oh, well, here's the thing, Terry. Let me explain to you why I use that phrase. Now we get to position ourselves why we use the phrase. We get to share the information and have the perspective. Current and historic market data. That's what it is. That's what a CMA is actually putting us together. Consumer confidence, buyer pulse. It's kind of fancy, right? That says, hey, we're taking a look at what buyers are actually finding interest in right now. Market metrics, lifestyle valuation based on areas, investment appeal, all of those. Yes, they're euphemisms and they're probably a little over-Jakeified in them, but they're there to give you perspective and to think about what it is you say and how you say that. And I would love to, if you put in the chat or want to share anything that you use or phrases that you use for this. We all need to think a little bit more about our words when we go through this process. So I'm going to talk about, which is going to sound crazy, we're going to talk about presenting to the seller. The single most important thing we can do in this entire process is help the seller understand the buyer mindset. If we talk about a commodity, right, in the past, the seller's like, I put a price on it, put a big sticker on the price tag on the property, and people decide if they want that or not, as if there's 40 other versions of this house on the shelf. Well, that's not how that works at all. And I think we'll talk much more about this in our next session. The biggest thing we can do for our sellers is to frame how buyers think, because that's really the entire piece we're trying to accomplish. And I put a couple of notes up here. I think of this all the time, right? We need to guide clients to understand buyer behavior, not MLS trivia. Clarity builds trust, emotion moves decision, right? And you'll hear me talk about the word clarity all the time. I'm a firm believer that it's one of the major components that every human needs is clarity. By the way, the other two are compassion and community. A CMA is not about price, it's about the buyer behavior. When we frame that, the pricing should become obvious. And, you've all been in listing presentations where like, well, I framed it pretty well, Jake, and the decision for the client was still not obvious. And that's okay, but what that tells us is there's a problem behind the problem with the seller, right? That they're like, well, everything you said 450, but I'm fully convinced it's 650. And you're like, well, let's unpack how you're thinking that number, right? By framing those things, we get more insight into the seller as well. So the buyer mindset in this piece, and for us, we're not focused on MLS trivia, and sometimes we do, but we need to package that in a slightly different way. So you've seen this slide before. I repeat these three phrases all of the time. Sellers have three fears, wants, needs, whatever you call it. Right? There's subcategories in there, but the short idea is they want the highest price in the shortest time with the fewest hassles. Now, I will wholly recommend, and Jen's probably tired of even hearing this after being on enough presentations with me. She's like, here goes Jake's dialogue. But it's the same dialogue I use all the time. And when you talk with your sellers, I want you to use this all the time. Teresa, hey, when we get ready to sell your house, I'm sure, in my experience, sellers have three big needs. They want the highest price, the shortest time, the fewest hassles. Is there anything else that you're concerned about? Or of those three things, which one is the most important? right? In typical fashion, as Teresa should, and every client should. They're like, well, all three are important. You're like, cool. I've got a great system for that, but I just want to make sure there's nothing else. What we do in that is immediately say, I already know what you need. Now what I need to know is the specifics. So we sort of take all these objections off the plate right away by saying like, hey, I'm great at what I do, and I've got a system that does all three of these things, but help me focus in. So it sort of pushes that conversation off the plate, tells them that you're, for instance, good at what you do, you've got a system, you've got a process, and you think about this. So find a way to incorporate that in a phrase that resonates with you. You know, hey, my system is designed to help us get the highest price, the shortest time, the fewest hassles, but I need some details and information from you. So we lead the seller conversation with that. That helps us move into this process a little bit. Now, here's the thing we don't do, or we don't do often enough, I'll say it that way, is then take that conversation and say, Teresa, I know those are your concerns, and you're an individual person selling a wonderful home, but let's talk about the buyer pool for a second, right? All of the individuals that are going to be viewing this property based on their criteria, right? And if I'm the or if I'm the buyer's agent on the other side, I'm having this conversation that I'm going to have with you, Teresa, to educate my buyers. So I want you to know what their mindset's going to be when they come in, right? And you really start to approach this at a two sides kind of piece. If you've done this in the past, and I know many of you are fantastic at it, when you talk about the buyer's side, you get to say things like, remember when you bought this house and when you did this, and they're like, oh yeah, totally. And you're like, right? So you're creating this, I'll call it synergy a little bit, or at least appreciation for the buyer side and reminding them what it's like to be the buyer. So buyers have four fears. They're going to miss something, they're going to lose something, they're going to pay too much, or it's going to be a lemon, right? Missing something, we remind our clients, our sellers, that buying a home is a process of elimination, not selection, which, by the way, we'll do an entire section on the buyer consultation, reminding your buyer that, hey, our job is not to continue to look. And if it is, I might not be the right agent for you. But what we're going to do is identify all the properties that meet our criteria and eliminate them. Good, bad, or indifferent, what we're left with is our house, which could be our home based on the criteria we have, right? Time and all price and you know, all of those things. So educating our sellers to that is incredibly important. They don't want to lose anything. Buyers, as you know, have what I call main character energy. Well, I'm the only one who wants to buy this house. You're like, well, actually, in this market right now, there's a whole lot of people thinking the exact same thing, and they're represented by an agent who is maybe as good as I am. So there is always competition for a property. Even on the overpriced properties, there's competition, and there's lots of reasons we lose properties and things like that. Price, they all want a deal. You know, Teresa, when you bought this house, I guarantee you had a conversation with your agent that said, well, they're asking $450, but I bet we could get it for $350. You're like, well, I said $375. You're like, I know you did, right? I know, right? Everybody wants the deal. Nobody wants to give up the deal, right? So that's the big piece for buyers. The other side of that is, you know, are they going to buy something that's going to require them to open a new Home Depot and a Lowe's credit card and keep a handyman on retainer, right? They're concerned that what they don't see about the house is going to cause them problems later. Now, this house is fantastic, and we're going to do some things, but I need us to know that the buyers have those four fears. All right. When you shift that mindset, you gain that appreciation, at least on both sides. I'll pause for a second. Any thoughts from the crowd? And Jen, do you have any thoughts on what we're talking about? I know you and I have talked a lot about this topic and the big piece. So feel free to throw anything in you've got.
No, I think this is great. And part of the green print that we talked about last session was those 5 questions that you're going to give the sellers.
Yes.
And while you were talking, I was thinking about those, and I know we'll hit on those more in the next session also when we're doing the actual presentation of this. to our sellers, but those questions are so important, even if the sellers don't answer them, but to bring those into the conversation and think about those as we're
Yeah.
creating this CMA. This is their home,
Yep.
and how are we going to um, focus in on the things that they really like and that
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the words. I can't think of the words.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No, no,
Jake.
that's okay. Yeah.
Do you know what
And
I'm
I
talking
think,
about, though?
yep.
And,
I
and
think
I think
when
that's
you,
important for sellers too when you're thinking about this.
yeah, when you have those questions from the sellers, and you can even refer to them, and you're like, for instance, you wrote down here that, the seller's big fear and the big need is that it needs to go really, really quickly. And you're like, you can take that and
Hmm.
package it into all of those things.
Hmm.
Main character energy, Teresa, is really just the idea that buyers are afraid that they're going to lose a property. And the short answer is they almost always are going to lose at least one in the beginning because they're going to underbid, or they think they're the only person that's looking at this property. So they take a lot of time to make the offer. They think that it's an item that they can go to the shelf and buy. And if it's not there, they'll restock it later. Buyers tend to think of it as a commodity on a shelf and not the one unique thing. So, lack of movement on their part to make decisions, pricing, and just, hesitation generally, as I say, bites them in the behind a little bit. So they think they're the only one that wants the property. Yep. So all of these things from the buyer's standpoint, the seller's standpoint, I like to weave them together as much as possible just because it really helps understand on both sides. In the buyer consultation, I do the same thing with the buyers and talk about the seller's big needs and wants. Like, hey, every home we look at is going to be motivated by these three things. So our strategy to win the offer is going to be, how do we interpret on the seller side what that looks like for them? And I mean, the short answer is it's all psychological mind games. That's sort of what we do a little bit. So let's talk about the CMA, comparative market analysis. I don't love to call it a CMA. It's the initial market position, whatever we call that. There is a whole lot of nuance here, and by no means is there one perfect way to do it. But there's a lot of really good ways. And again, I'd love for you guys later to share anything that you do that has some strategy or that's worked for you in the past. You know me, I take all the information in and just process it as much as possible and send it back out to you guys. The terms active, pending, sold, and expired are the very definition of MLS trivia. Most people kind of understand what active means. They mostly understand pending, sold, and expired. But by not reframing what those actually are, we're already doing a disservice to the process itself. So, when we put together a CMA in any tool, and MYC, you can use Cloud CMA, you can use the MLS. I say it lovingly. I don't care what you use. I just want you to be really, really good at that tool. And I hope that resonates with you. Now, I'd love for you to use MYC Present, and I'll share that in a second because I think it is one of the best. But here's some basic language you can talk about. So I put market in there every time. I say the word market as much as possible. I want to say it enough times so that my client Terry on the other side is like, Jake, you keep using the market. What is the market? And now you're like, well, let's talk about it, right? I'm luring them in to ask the question. The short answer is this. Actives are our competition. They are actively competing for our buyer right now. And I put in parentheses all to convey this idea. We typically, in any CMA class are like, well, you choose 3 or 4 of the best and you put each one. You're like, I'm cool with that idea. I actually think it's incredibly powerful to include every active property in your presentation. If it's 1, that says something. If it's 50, that says something, right? By referencing those actives, and again, one of my favorite coworkers in the past always had that same joke, and I love it because we can use it. It's like, well, they must not be that active if they're not pending. And I'm like, which is a great point, right? It frames what the buyer is like, well, that's on the market, but I don't love it, right? But it is still the competition for us. Pending, I like to call them the qualifiers. That's what the market is qualified to be of value, right? The market found value in those pendings based on where they started. Now, we always want to say the same thing. We don't know the final sort of the contract price. We don't know the agreed upon price till later. But where it started created enough value to qualify for the buyers to see that value. The solds, those are the performers. Those won a race. Those finished. Those made it to the end. The market saw those as high performing properties that people wanted to look at. And the expireds, sometimes I call them failures. I've modified my language. I don't mind, by the way, using failures, especially with one of those clients who's like, has this kind of energy. You're like, well, those properties failed. They failed to connect with a single buyer in the market, right? When you need to tighten the thumb screws a little bit, I don't mind using that. But for the most part, expireds are false starts, right? Doesn't mean they're not going to get a chance to run, but they tripped out of the gate and didn't even make it too far. In that same vein, I like to include every expired, failed, non-value property as well. Just like on our actives, it shows something. Hey, there's 8 other properties in the same time frame that, and sometimes I will say, overpriced in the beginning and tripped coming out of the blocks in the race. There's a lot of different places, and I don't want to go too deep into how we pick the comps and what we do, but I will say this. I don't get too bound up on the idea of exact matches or details. I mean, I do. It's like your house is a 3-bedroom, 3.5 bath. I want to find mostly in that category, but I also convey to the sellers. And again, anytime you present information, you have to tell the story behind it. But I also say this, I'm like, hey, I'm actually less concerned about finding specific matches that are just like your home. What I like to think about is what other homes would a buyer be considering that are considering your home, right? And to me, that speaks volumes. Buyers in this market, they're looking for a school district. They're looking for an area. They're looking for a commute. Yes, they love this home, but they might also be considering these other homes, right? This home's a little further away. It's a little smaller, but the price point is here. I don't want us to overthink it, but I don't want us to miss that opportunity even for ourselves to say, what else would they be looking at? And an easy way for you to frame this to the client or to the seller is to say, hey, when I bring buyers into this neighborhood, I also take them to all of these other areas because we know that's true, right? Buyers, unless it's a specific need, like, no, I want to be in this neighborhood, buyers are often like, I'm over here, I'm over here, I'm over here. They're looking in a lot of different areas. So you already have that information of what buyers are going to be looking for. And framing that to your clients is like, oh, you mean they don't just want to live in this neighborhood? I'm like, maybe they do, one individual buyer, but we're talking about the buyer pool, all of the people who are actively looking right now. And again, I'm happy to explain more of this and go into more detail down the road. But again, I think the key points here is what we call them and which ones we include when we can. Whether it's 30, 60, 90 days, you sort of have to massage that. Just make that consistent between, if you're going to choose 30 days, everything meets that 30-day criteria. Don't cheat and include, 60 and 90 days for your expireds just to make it look more painful.
Hey, Jake,
So,
do you mind if I jump in for just a
yeah,
second?
please, please,
I
please.
really like that you're talking about the language that we use. As someone that came from education and
Yeah,
I'm new to kind of new, I mean,
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
family business, right?
I was going to say you've been in the
But
family business, whether you like it or not, for a long time.
yes. But I really like your changing the words from active, pending, sold,
Yeah,
expireds, because not all sellers are going to understand all that language. But if you
yeah,
talk about it in terms of competition, qualifiers, performers, false start, I think
yep,
that's fantastic. It's more clear, plain English for the common
Yeah.
person
And,
to understand.
and I think like anything, we all become experts the moment we need to become an expert. And as soon
Hmm.
as we've bought the house or sold the house, we're like, all that information just goes out the window, as it should. So, reminding them, and here's the thing,
Hmm.
all of this, all of their understanding depends on how well the last agent did to describe those things. And
Hmm.
I mean, I'm going to say this lovingly, but I don't trust most of us. Like, if I had to rely on another agent doing their job all of the time, that's, hey, your previous agent might have been great, but let me share you that's an okay place to be to make
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
So
You're building trust by
building
speaking
trust,
in
like
their
every
language.
step, every step of the way, you're demonstrating. You're like, hey, I know my stuff. This is my
Hmm.
system. The system may not be right for you, and that's okay. I'm happy to refer you to somebody with a completely mess of a system who sounds perfect for you, right? But my system, not everybody earns the right to work with me, and I think that's
Right.
okay to say.
Yep.
So, big picture, when we talked about the green print last week, I don't, in my packet of stuff, drop off pricing. I don't include pricing for one reason. I don't want to give anybody anything that needs an explanation without being there to explain it. I Now there are some cases where somebody's like, "Jake, just send me the numbers." I'm like, "Cool." And in my mind, I'll just be like, I may not even, I will follow up with them. But if they're so adamant about that, the truth is my system may not be right for them anyway. Their focus is somewhere completely different. I'll be like, "Hey, I'm going to send you a CMA. Let me know if you have questions." I'm happy to do that. But I will prepare the CMA. I'll drop off the packet, and we talked about it in the green print. I'll drop off the packet. I'll go back to my office because I've now done recon on the house and the neighborhood and the area. And I'm like, I'm going to do the pricing right now. I'm not going to give it to them, but I'm going to put it together because it's all sort of fresh and loaded into my mind. So I've got that in my back pocket. One of the awesome things about Moxie Present is, and here's where we run into problems, most of us wait to do the CMA till the day or so before we go out to the property. And I'm okay with that, minus the fact that the CMA is one of the most important things we do, and we wait till the very last minute to do it. It's like if I were going to be Teresa, if you were going to be in a stage play or put on a show, and you're like, "Hey, I go on stage on Friday evening, but I'm going to wait to put my costume together till Friday afternoon." It's a little stressful, right? It's a little stressful, and it's maybe not the best time. Anything we can do beforehand to alleviate the stress of the presentation is important. So I put it together. I've got it in my back pocket. The great thing about Moxie is, and I'll talk about it, and I know I'm running a little long, there's some great pieces for Moxie that help us. So in our next session, we're gonna talk about the tour, what happens when we show up at the door, the path and the strategy and the language we use to take the tour of the home. The next section in our visit and listing presentation is what I call the mic drop pages, how we present our marketing. And I go in that order. Give me the tour, let's talk about marketing. And the third step in my actual visit to the house is what I call, confirming the initial market position, presenting the pricing. So we're skipping the first two. We're gone through the home. We're sitting down at the table. And I want to talk about what the Moxie piece looks like from this. I put this in. I am a huge advocate of using Moxie for this reason, because we can present it electronically. I will have my laptop preloaded. We'll talk about this in a second. Flip open the lid and be like, "Let's talk about this," and turn the laptop to them and show you, I'm going to show it in a second, what the presentation looks like. Now, you hear me use the phrase both and all the time. Doesn't mean I don't want you to take a big giant stack of papers. Cool. It's your safety net. It's your whoopee, right? It's your comfort blanket to have all these papers, and I'm okay with that because that's what we've done. But I want you to think both and. I want you to say to the clients, "Hey, I'm going to leave you this giant stack of papers, but I want us to take a look at the homes here, and here's the magic. Buyers, 97% of buyers are searching for homes online. We would be doing ourselves a disservice to price your home off of a stack of papers when buyers are pricing the homes off of the internet, right? So you tell them why you're doing this. I'll give you all the papers because I know some people I love paper. But let's talk about our initial market position, our pricing strategy, in the same way that buyers are going to do that evaluation. Most every client is going to be like, oh, that makes total sense. Now, there's a comfort zone for us, right? After you see me made the note, prep, plan, and pivot, you're like, well, do I get online? How do I do? We got to figure those things out. Maybe you hotspot your phone. Maybe your iPad has, cellular. I don't have that answer. I just need you to figure out that answer and then to test yourself to be able to do it. Can I drive to a random location, open up my laptop, and present this content electronically? You got to test it. No more than Teresa would write a song and just walk on stage and perform it without without trying it out a few times. I mean, I know you've done it, but also the magic of doing this is when we give them access to the laptop and the data, even though it's not that deep, it feels collaborative. It brings them into the strategy and the process. We're no longer the wizard behind the curtain who does the big reveal of, here's your price. We're making them part of this conversation, even just by psychologically letting them scroll around and click on a few things. That's the big takeaway, and that's the magic. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to play this video and sort of talk over it here in a second. I just did a screen recording. The other day as I was scrolling through a couple things just to have you show this. Play. There we go. So this is the client experience. This is not the agent building the CMA. This is what I'm showing my client on my laptop in front of them as I'm sitting there. And you can see, this is my parents' house, by the way. I put in a bunch of random things because I want to sort of highlight this point. You can craft this CMA however you want. In the agent remarks, I made a joke that the peanut's right down the street. Like, this is the presentation side. There's the agent side where they get everything ready to do that. I'm going to pause that real quick just for a second. That first page, you get to decide everything that goes on that page, what we say, how we describe the property. You notice in some of the blanks I put NA or not applicable. I'm a huge advocate of putting something on every line because it tells the client subconsciously that I made a choice and I reviewed that information. So even if I put the pool line, I put, other than the small blue pool, right? I just, that's sort of a joke for us, but the idea is I evaluated every line because that's the first page the clients are going to see. If it's short on information, you're telling your clients that you don't have much information. I would rather put NA, not applicable, not in every single piece, because I think that says this person knows a lot. And again, you're there to walk them through. I'm running it as a video just so I can go through that, but you have the option to click through each page and sort of stick there. So I'm going to play the video. This to me is the most important screen we have. You can do your entire listing, presentation, pricing conversation from this screen. I'll start the video and play a little bit. So you can see I went in, I overdid it. I didn't even follow my own rules of, 4, 4, and 4. The greens are active. Reds are sold. Orange is pending. Grays are expired. So you can see the map itself. The client can go in and click on a property. It opens up the property. They can scroll through the photos. They get the exact experience that a buyer on the MLS would be looking at. And that is massively important in this conversation of pricing. Not going to throw any more shade at the paper, but when you're looking at it on paper, it is just not the same feeling. So you can see I'm zoomed into the map. I'm the client's looking through properties. I'm telling my client, they're like, well, what should I look at? And I'm like, you know, this is your neighborhood. You know these homes better than I do. I know them pretty well, but these are your neighbors. These are our competition. These are the proven winners. These are the potential winners, right? You're having that conversation. There's a number of templates. I've actually built what I call the green print template which includes essentially just the 9 pages that I think are important. I'm going to pause this here for a second. The previous pages, there's like 4 or 5 views. I can view them all as individual houses so I can scroll. I don't need that page because I sort of have it on that first page where we have the map view. Numbers and data people, right? This stuff is awesome. Just point it out real quick. I can turn on and off. I'm pointing at my screen like you can see it. I'm pointing at my screen. I can turn on and off the actives, pendings, solds, and others, and it will calculate the data here based on whatever is turned on or off. So if I'm like, hey, let's just take a look at what is pending, I can uncheck everything else and leave pending checked, and it's going to draw my little bars and graphs just based on the pending properties. So I can say, hey, based on what was just pending, here's the number. I can take a look at the solds and do the same. It's calculating the data for us based on whatever's turned on. And I know this is going sort of fast. Obviously, you'd go slower. There's line graphs, which if I'm honest, I don't do a great job at describing. That was never my mathematical strong suit, is describing line graphs. Pie charts, that's my thing. Line graphs, I'm like, I don't know. And the answer is here. You don't have to include all of these. If you can't do an adequate description of it, I don't know that I would include it.
Yeah.
But the short answer is, and Jen, you know this, right? You're like, don't put anything in that, as a teacher, as an educator, if you put something in and the kids are like, tell me more about this, and you're like,
not a good look.
Yeah, not a good look for anybody. You can include and exclude and add pages. I've just put together the core template of what I feel like are the most important pages. Because again, we already talked about marketing for 15 minutes before we even got to this part, which is something we'll talk about again in our next session, how to go through that whole thing. So of course, one of the pages in there is a listing tour video page. Hey, remember when we talked 5 minutes ago about, one of the strategies to help increase our buyer pool is I do these listing tour videos or listing carousel videos. Here's a sample, and you can watch them in the piece. If you happen to have one of your own, you can swap out one of these with your own video to play it right there. Hey, here's a sample of what I did on the last property, right? So this is interactive, it's live, it does depend on the internet connection, but it's actionable, it's collaborative, it's part of the big strategy. It's still a presentation, but anytime, you guys know this, anytime you can bring someone in and be part of the process, it just makes it feel different. I'm presenting today, I'm talking, you're listening and watching. It's not exactly collaborative, right? So I'm going to pause on this last slide. We presented the pricing, here's all the data, we've looked at stuff. While I'm going through those slides, I don't do this every time, and I don't know that it's right for you, but sometimes I will literally take out an empty sheet of paper with my Sharpie, and I love Sharpies. I'll draw a box. And as I'm going through that process, I'll start with the actives. So here's the thing. So we've got 18 different actives. Remember, those are our competition. And I've already done the math in my head a little bit. They're from 450 to 475, and let's call it an average have been on the market for 21 days. And I'll write that at the bottom. I'll go to the pending, solds, and expireds, and I'll do the same sort of thing. And the visual here is exactly what you expect. And honestly, sometimes I do draw a little roof on top and make it a house because it really brings home this thing. It's cheesy, I know, but it works. But what I've done is I've framed our conversation. Here's the actives, here's the pendings, here's the solds, here's the expireds, which are literally the ceiling, because remember, those are false starts and failures. And I'll write down the numbers. Between the solds, they were from 375 to 450, and they were roughly on the market for 45 days. I'll just put that data in to help them frame it, and I will literally hand the pen to the client and be like, where do you guys think we should be? Right? And you've all been in the room where the client writes down a number that says 750. And you're like, here's the thing, Mark, I want you to get 750 for this house. I mean, I'll be honest, I make more money when you get 750. But here's the thing. The data has given us a box which, outside of doing some larger things, I don't know that the market supports that information. This tells us what the market supports, right? And you get to ask the tough questions, and Mark will mention the sconces that they imported from Italy that are very important to them, which, we all know that doesn't typically shift the balance too much in a favor. But what you've done is you've shown them the data, you've given them clarity, you've walked them through the understanding of why that data matters, and here we are boxing them in sort of psychologically with the idea of our number has to live inside of those boundaries, because that's what the market has determined as the boundaries. Now, all of your methods are fantastic, as long as we're giving the information to the client, describing why that information matters. Why does active matter? Why does our competition matter, right? Why do the expireds, the false starts matter? It helps them get the understanding. And even if Mark is adamant about the 750, that tells us a whole lot, right? We get to ask the question, be like, Mark, do you want 750 or do you need 750? And Mark's like, oh, dude, I am in so much financial trouble right now. And you're like, okay, I can deal with that. I just need to know that information, right? The difference between the unrealistic expectation that's based out of something else that I don't know about versus logical, rational sort of conversation that we're having here. And again, that's an entire, overcoming objections piece that I can't go into today, but I'm happy to talk more about. But, the big takeaways here, the words we use matter. They matter, incredibly important. How we present the information matters just as much. And the simple answer is, I can tell you this with absolute certainty, even if you fumble through the electronic version of MYC, the client subconsciously is like, they didn't hand me a stack of papers to sort through 400 photos and a bunch of stuff that doesn't make any sense. That already feels better. She didn't do a great job. He didn't do a great job of really clicking through the screens and got fumbled. But I appreciate this being different because now I understand what the buyer is doing to look at properties, right? The buyers no longer get a giant stack of papers from their agent. And yes, sometimes they do, and that's okay, right? But the point here is that big piece of differentiation. The words matter. Us doing something that looks different to the client already says this agent brings more value to the stage. Next steps, Jen. Sorry, yes. Anything else? Anything else that you guys had questions before we sort of wrap up next steps? Thanks for letting me go long. Big surprise.
So next steps on Tuesday, usually we do the why on Thursdays, and Tuesdays we do the how. We are not going to do the how on how to use MYC Present on Tuesday. Instead, we're going to have a discussion. Hopefully there will be some people at your office meeting that do use MYC Present, and we'll be able to provide some more information through discussion about how they use it, why they use it, that sort of thing. Jake has provided a really great walkthrough video, not the one that he just included here, but an actual how to use MYC Present.
From the agent perspective, like you going through the process.
Right. Yep, you going through the process. It is in our folder in the agent training drive. So I would suggest if you are not familiar with MYC Present, you want to learn a little bit more about it, how to maybe use it, to go through that video. And then the last week of each month from here on out, Jake and I are going to be doing GSD days. You heard on Town Hall. And if you need help with anything in MYC, that would be a great time to hit us up. Show up at any of the offices. If you can't go on Tuesday to Mission Farms, but you can go Wednesday to the Northland or Thursday to College Boulevard, come by any office. It doesn't have to be the office that you have a desk in.
Yep, and you're like, hey, help me figure this thing out. Like, we'll sit down one-on-one and go through it. And I made that last note too to make it click. A quick version of the story: when my son Hamilton was taking skateboarding lessons, his skateboard instructor said this all the time. If he did a trick once, she was always 2 to make it click. And I love that idea of like, you have to do it twice to really understand it. And you hear me use the phrase all the time when an agent says, I'll just get it and play with it. Well, that's almost the right mindset, but when we just click around, we don't have to solve a real problem. Until we have to solve a real problem, it doesn't make any sense. And you have to solve a real problem twice to really be like, oh, that's why this. So I am adamant about you finding a property, maybe a listing that you're looking to land or something like that, and putting that pricing together. going through the MYC piece, putting it together, send it to me and let me take a look at it. I'll give you feedback on it, but give yourself a real tangible problem, hopefully one that also lands you a listing, and go through that process. So I think that's so important in this process. So anything else that anybody has? Any questions?
Nope.
You guys are amazing.
Terry mentioned that she didn't know about toggling between the statuses on MYC.
Yeah,
So
it's
that's
kind
awesome.
of it's weird. I'll say it's a weird little hidden feature that I don't think is incredibly obvious, and it does the math for us. So I'm like, here, let's look at just those properties, and especially if they're like, well, we want to price a little bit higher than everybody else on the market, and it shows you like, hey, let's just look at the actives, our competition, right? They're priced. Here's their price range, and their days on market is here. Mark, are you okay being on the market for potentially 55 days? Well, no, I got to move. And like, well, how do you want to move forward? Right? That's my favorite phrase. How do you want to move forward? It really helps to dial in those individual pieces. And with the printout, you guys are good at math, but I'm not so quick at doing hand math. Like I'm like, here's a button that shows me some numbers. It's a pretty powerful tool. Thank you.
Hey, Jake, we have one more question from Norma
Yeah,
Gray.
what's up?
She says, do you think it's okay to include new homes in an area that doesn't have a
Great.
resale available
Yeah,
as one of your
Norma,
actives?
Yep, Norma, great question. And in truth, sometimes I end up doing two CMAs. Right? It's the formula of here's the four pendings, here's the four solds, here's all the actives, and here's all the expireds. I might have, especially in a case like this where there's a lot of new construction, there's a whole lot of anomalies. I might tell the client, hey, I actually have a presentation that shows everything, and I've had to go in and sort of assign a value based on the builder's intention of where he's going to market the property to show all of these things. So I'll also have that presentation where it's like an even bigger view, and I'm happy to explain that with the client. I think, MYC imports from the MLS, but if we've got maybe a bunch of new homes that are coming on the market that aren't on the MLS, we can add those properties in manually and say, hey, there's 5 new homes that are being built that aren't currently active. I went in and made placeholders in MYC for them. The builder says they're all going to go on the market between 450 and 475. Yeah, spec homes, competitions, stuff sitting right now. Which I know is a slightly different conversation from new homes. The spec homes, the same thing. You can add those in to MYC if they don't happen to be on the MLS. But if they are on the MLS, import those. Anything, Norma, I guess the short answer is anything, Norma, that the buyer for the home you want to list might also be considering, I absolutely think we should have that in the conversation. And sometimes it's easier just to have it in a separate presentation. Sometimes we just dump it all into one. It just sort of depends on, I think, your client, your seller's needs at that point. But yeah, me, I love to overwhelm them with lots of information just because I can talk about it. That's always my move. Great. And if you have questions about that later and want to sit down and talk details, I'm happy to help do that.
Yep.
All right, team. Thank
Great.
you. Thanks as always, Jen. Thanks for being
Jake.
here, you guys. We'll see you guys soon.
Bye, Jake. Thank you.